The sun hung low over the dusty plains of the Arizona Territory in 1887, painting the sky in streaks of orange and red. Elias Thorne, a weathered rancher in his mid-40s, rode his faithful mare along the familiar trail back to his isolated spread. He'd spent the day in town, selling cattle and stocking up on supplies, but something felt off as he approached the old abandoned mine shaft on the edge of his property, a place locals whispered about with wide eyes and hushed voices. The mine had been sealed years ago after a collapse claimed half a dozen lives. Folks said it was cursed, haunted by the spirits of the dead miners, and worse, that strange things lurked in its depths. "Don't go near it," the old-timers warned. "Don't look inside, that's forbidden. Some sites ain't meant for living eyes." Elias had always scoffed at the superstitions. He was a practical man, hardened by years of loss, his wife taken by fever a decade prior, his only son off fighting in some distant war. Superstitions were for the weak, but tonight, as he passed the boarded-up entrance, he heard it, a faint, desperate cry echoing from within. It sounded human, female, pleading. He reined in his horse, heart pounding. "Hello," he called out, his voice rough from disuse. The cry came again, weaker this time. Against every instinct, against every warning he'd ever heard, Elias dismounted and approached the rickety boards nailed across the opening. Dust and cobwebs clung to them, undisturbed for years. "Don't," a faint voice whispered from the darkness beyond, as if the mine itself was speaking. "That's forbidden." Elias froze, his hand on the hammer he'd pulled from his saddlebag to pry the boards loose. The voice was real, coming from inside. A woman's voice, laced with fear and pain. "Who's there?" he demanded, his grip tightening. "Please, don't look," she begged, her words barely audible. "Just go, it's not safe." But Elias Thorne was not a man who turned away from trouble. He'd faced down bandits, stampedes, and droughts that broke lesser men. Curiosity burned in him now, mingled with concern. What if someone was trapped, hurt, dying? "I'm coming in," he grunted, swinging the hammer. The old nails gave way with creaks and groans, the boards splintering as he tore them free. Dust billowed out, choking the air. He lit his lantern and peered into the gaping maw of the mine. What he saw made his blood run cold. There, chained to the far wall amid piles of rubble and rusted tools, was a young woman, no more than 20 by the look of her. Her clothes were tattered, Apache in style, with beaded patterns faded from time and grime. Her dark hair fell in tangled waves, and her face, though smeared with dirt and tears, was strikingly beautiful. Bruises marred her skin, and a fresh wound bled from her leg where it seemed she'd tried to free herself. But that wasn't what shocked him most. Around her neck hung a necklace of polished turquoise and silver, an Apache talisman, sacred and rare. And in the shadows behind her, faint carvings on the wall glowed faintly in the lantern light, ancient symbols, warnings from a time before white men claimed this land. This wasn't just a mine. It was a burial site, a sacred place desecrated long ago by greedy prospectors. The Apache had sealed it themselves, or so the stories went, cursing any who disturbed it. The woman locked eyes with him, wide with terror. "You shouldn't have looked," she whispered. "Now you're part of it, the spirits. They don't let go." Elias' mind reeled. He'd heard tales of Apache maidens left as offerings or trapped in rituals but dismissed them as nonsense. Yet here she was, real, suffering. Bandits must have found her, chained her here as some cruel joke or ransom ploy, not knowing the place's true horror. "Who did this to you?" he growled, stepping forward. "Raiders," she said, her voice trembling. "They took me from my people, said they'd come back, but you looked anyway, the curse." "Forget the curse," Elias snapped, though a chill ran down his spine. He knelt beside her, examining the chains. They were old but sturdy, locked with a padlock. "Hold still." She shook her head violently. "No touching me here. It's forbidden. The spirits will claim you too." Elias hesitated, the warnings echoing in his head. "Don't look. Don't touch. That's forbidden." If he walked away now, he could board it up again, pretend he never saw. No one would know. He'd live out his days in peace. But as she winced in pain, blood trickling from her wound, something snapped inside him. The loneliness of his life crashed down, the empty cabin, the silent nights. This woman, stranger though she was, represented something alive, something worth saving, even if it meant defying the old fears. With a determined grunt, he smashed the padlock with his hammer. Once, twice, it shattered. The chains fell away. She gasped, collapsing forward into his arms. Up close, her eyes were deep pools of dark fire, filled with a mix of gratitude and dread. You did the unthinkable," she murmured, clinging to him. "You freed me from the forbidden place." Elias helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as they emerged into the twilight. The air felt cleaner outside, the cries of the mine silenced behind them. He boarded up the entrance hastily, but as he did, a faint whisper seemed to follow them on the wind, a warning or perhaps a curse. Her name, she told him later by the fire in his cabin, was Naeli, meaning "I love you" in her language. She was the daughter of a tribal elder, kidnapped by outlaws seeking to provoke a war. Over the weeks that followed, as her wounds healed under his care, an unexpected bond formed. She taught him Apache ways, stories of the land's true spirits. He showed her the quiet strength of a rancher's life. The townsfolk whispered when they saw her riding beside him, a white rancher and an Apache woman. Forbidden, they said, unthinkable. But Elias didn't care. He'd looked into the darkness and pulled light from it, and in doing so, he'd found something he'd long thought lost, a reason to live. Years later, on quiet evenings, Naeli would tease him. "You were told not to look." "And I looked anyway," he'd reply with a grin, pulling her close. "Best damn decision I ever made." The mine remained sealed, its secrets buried once more. But the curse, some say it never took hold. Others swear that on windy nights you can still hear the whispers, "Don't, that's forbidden." Elias Thorne never listened, and he never regretted it. The first time Elias Mercer heard the words, they were spoken like a prayer and a warning all at once. "Don't," old Mrs. Calder whispered, her thin hand clamped around his wrist with surprising strength. "That's forbidden." Elias had laughed then, a soft, polite sound meant to ease her nerves. He just inherited the Calder Ranch, 3,000 acres of dry grassland, creaking barns, and one massive house that sat like a tired monarch on a low hill. The lawyers had spoken in careful tones, explaining easements, mineral rights, livestock counts. No one had mentioned forbidden things. He thought Mrs. Calder was talking about the North Pasture. Everyone in the county knew that land hadn't been grazed in decades. Fences rotted. The grass grew wild and uneven, hiding rocks that could break a horse's leg. Superstitions had a way of clinging to places like burrs. But Mrs. Calder's eyes hadn't been on the pasture when she said it. They were fixed on the house. More specifically, on the west wing. Elias dismissed the feeling that crawled up his spine. He was 36, practical, raised on logic and hard work. He had bought failing ranches before, turned them around, sold them. This one was different only because it had been left to him by a woman he barely knew. Mrs. Calder had been his mother's employer decades ago. Elias remembered her as a tall, severe woman with a soft spot for horses and children. She paid for his school clothes one winter when his father was sick. He'd repaid that kindness by checking in on her over the years. Groceries, repairs, quiet conversations. When she died, she left him everything. Except answers. The house was older than the county records claimed. Thick stone walls, dark wood beams, and doors that never quite sat straight in their frames. Elias moved in alone, bringing only what he needed: clothes, tools, his books, and a photo of his parents that he kept on the nightstand. For the first week, nothing happened. He worked from dawn to dusk, fixing fences, repairing the barn roof, inventorying cattle that had gone half wild. At night, he cooked simple meals and slept deeply. On the 8th night, he heard the door. It was subtle, A soft click followed by a slow, deliberate creak. Elias sat up in bed, heart already pounding. The sound came again, unmistakably from inside the house. He grabbed the flashlight from his nightstand and stepped into the hallway. The house was dark, the kind of dark that swallowed sound. He moved slowly, listening. Another creak. It was coming from the west wing. He hesitated. Mrs. Calder's voice echoed in his mind. "Don't, that's forbidden." Elias shook his head and kept walking. The west wing had been locked since he arrived. A heavy oak door with an iron latch blocked the hallway. Elias hadn't forced it before. He'd assumed it held nothing but storage rooms and old furniture. The latch now hung open. The door stood ajar. Cold air seeped through the crack, carrying a faint scent, dust, iron, and something else. Something alive. "Hello," Elias called. No answer. He pushed the door open. The west wing wasn't what he expected. Instead of storage rooms, it held a long corridor lined with portraits. Dozens of them. Men and women painted in somber colors, their eyes following him as he moved. The style shifted as he walked, centuries of faces, all bearing the same stern expression. At the end of the corridor stood another door. It was smaller, newer. And it was shaking. Elias froze. The shaking wasn't violent. It was rhythmic, like someone pressing a hand against the wood again and again. Slow, desperate. "Is someone there?" he asked. The shaking stopped. Then a voice, barely audible, slipped through the door. "Please." Elias' breath caught. He reached for the handle, then stopped. His pulse thundered in his ears. He didn't believe in curses or forbidden wings, but he believed in people needing help. He opened the door. The room beyond was bare except for a bed, a small table, and a single barred window. On the bed sat a young woman. She looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes. "Don't look at me," she said quickly, turning her face away. Elias frowned. "Are you hurt?" "No," she whispered, "but you shouldn't be here, you shouldn't see this." She pulled the thin blanket tighter around herself, as if it could hide her existence. "What is this place?" Elias demanded, anger flaring beneath his confusion. "Who locked you in here?" The woman laughed, a broken sound. "Your house did." Elias took a step closer. "That's not funny." She glanced at him then, and he finally understood why she told him not to look. Her eyes weren't human. They were silver, reflective like a horse, in moonlight, beautiful and terrifying at once. Elias staggered back. "I told you," she said softly, "it's forbidden." He should have run. Instead, he asked her name. "Marrow," she replied. "At least that's what she called me." "Who?" "Mrs. Calder." Elias' world tilted. Over the days that followed, the truth spilled out in fragments. Mrs. Calder hadn't been merely an employer or a landowner. She'd been a keeper. Generations ago, something had been bound to the land, something not evil but not human. A guardian created through rituals long forgotten. Its purpose was to protect the ranch from drought, fire, and ruin. In return, it required care. When the guardian was wounded centuries later, it had taken human form to survive. And been trapped in it. Marrow was the result. "She was afraid of me," Marrow said one night as Elias brought her food. "Afraid of what would happen if people knew, so she hid me. She called it protection." Elias' jaw clenched. "That's not protection, that's a prison." "She believed the land would die without me," Marrow replied. And maybe she was right. Elias didn't sleep much after that. He researched obsessively, old county records, family journals hidden in the house, brittle letters tucked into drawers. The Calder line stretched back farther than anyone realized, always tied to this land. Always marked by unusual prosperity during harsh years, and always shadowed by disappearances. Servants who left abruptly, children sent away, a wing of the house sealed off and whispered about. Elias returned to Marrow's room each night, bringing food, books, conversation. He found her intelligent, curious, painfully lonely. She asked endless questions about the world beyond the walls. "What does rain in the city sound like?" she asked once. He tried to describe it. Her smile haunted him long after he left. The land began to change. Grass grew thicker. Streams that had run dry for years trickled back to life. The cattle grew calm, healthy. And Marrow grew weaker. "You're fatting," Elias said one evening, panic sharp in his voice. She nodded. "The bond is shifting, you see me. You care. That was never supposed to happen." "What happens now?" She hesitated. "The land needs a keeper, or it will take one." Elias understood then. The unthinkable choice lay before him. He could lock the door again, pretend he'd never seen her, let the ancient balance remain intact. Or he could break the bond, free Marrow and doom the ranch. Or there was the third option. The forbidden one. He didn't tell Marrow his plan. He spent 3 days preparing, following rituals pieced together from half-burned journals and whispered legends. On the 4th night, under a moon swollen and red, he returned to the West Wing. Marrow sensed it immediately. "What are you doing?" "Fixing what should have never existed like this," Elias said. The ritual hurt more than he imagined. The land resisted, the walls groaning as if alive. Pain tore through his chest as the bond transferred, ancient power clawing at his bones. Marrow screamed his name. When it was over, Elias lay on the floor, gasping. Marrow knelt beside him, human eyes wide with tears. "What did you do?" she whispered. He smiled weakly, something forbidden. "The ranch survived. So did Marrow." Elias became something else, still human but bound to the land in a way that would outlast him. He felt the seasons in his blood, the storms before they came. And for the first time in centuries, the West Wing stood empty. Some nights, when the wind moves through the grass just right, people say they see a man and a woman standing on the hill, watching over the land together. They say the ranch has never known such peace. And they warn newcomers, with nervous smiles and lowered voices. Some things are forbidden for a reason.